I'm generally an American optimist, but I want to talk about a lot of stuff that's broken right now that we know how to fix, but we aren't. And talking to these guys, especially hearing from Elon and everyone today, it's just so exciting what our civilization is going towards, what it could be doing. But if you talk to a lot of our smartest friends, you look at guys like Dalio or Bridgewater and others, they see America in decline. They see decadence, they see decay. And I think there's a lot of important questions we're facing right now, like why do these happen to a civilization? Why, when there's so many exciting things going on that we know can make a really great future for our kids and grandkids and for humanity, why is this stuff breaking? And I want to tell you a little story. I have a policy group in Austin, and we have, we follow the homeless population there. And we're going along with a middle-aged Mexican gentleman who had just lost his job, and he went into the homeless center. And he's just really struggling. And he says, I really want to try to find a job. I want some job training. And the person working there, she says, sir, you deserve a home. And he said, yeah, that's great, but what, can I get some training? And she said, you don't need to worry about that. You need to worry about getting a home for people just like you and what you deserve. And I want to back up about the situation in Austin, because we're seeing this all over the country right now. In 2018, the mayor of Austin went to San Francisco and LA, and he was asking them for advice on what to do for homelessness. There wasn't really homelessness downtown. It's funny. This is funny to me too, but there's actually a reason he was asking them for advice, and it's a special interest thing, where there's actually hundreds of millions of funding that goes to these groups in SF and LA that work on this, and to all of their friends, and to all the people with their politics. And it's a huge money spigot for politicians. They're very powerful in those other cities. In Austin, they didn't have that money spigot, and he wanted it. And you know what they told him? I heard this from both sides. He said, you have to show people that capitalism doesn't work. You got to put it in their faces, and then you'll get funding. And he went back to Austin, and he brought all the camps downtown. Homeless death spiked, homeless trafficking spiked, sex trafficking spiked, drugs spiked, but the funding went way up for him and his friends. They got massive new funding, unaccountable sources of money for these people. And then of course they start deploying the answers, which is the housing first strategy. And by the way, this is not just like a right versus left thing. I think housing first was first deployed under W. Bush. So this is a general strategy. You guys probably know in LA they spend $800,000 per new home trying to solve this problem. There's 7,000 nonprofits right now, funded by HUD around our country with the same philosophy. And the philosophy is no pay for performance, no transparency, no accountability, just build the homes. And when I first heard about this a decade ago, I thought, wow, that makes sense. There's 5,000 homeless people. Let's build 5,000 homes. It turns out that there's still about a couple % of our society that really don't have a home, but they're living kind of on the edge, on people's couches, with other family, with friends. So the actual demand for homes, it turns out maybe it's about 6 million, 10 million. It's effectively infinite. There's infinite demand for homes in our society. And who do you think gets these homes when we build them? So this guy, we were following, a few hundred people with my philanthropy group, and our team goes back in with him. And he gets in line, and he's been leaving between a camp that they helped him set up in downtown and a relative's house, but he's saying he's living outside in camp. And he goes back, and he's just missed getting a home, and he's frustrated, and they're explaining the point system, and he says, wait a second, so you're saying that if I was on drugs, I'd qualify for a home? And they said, well, we don't like to say it that way, but that's true. And he says, you're saying if I committed a crime, I'd qualify for a home. And they're like, well, yeah, but yeah, we don't like to say it that way, but that's true. That would have given you enough points to qualify for a home. And what happens here, if you try to bait this system, 7,000 of these groups around the country, you're screamed at as a racist, you're screamed at with ad hominem attacks. There's three things. One, there's not the intellectual humility to see that there may be other answers that may be correct. Two, there's no respect for the dignity of everyone in these conversations. If you disagree, you are a bad person. And three, there's no passion for the truth. These people are not trying to pursue the truth. These people already have the truth, and they're giving it to you as a dogma. And this is true of pretty much every of these broken areas in our society, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them right now. There's we have 50 training programs that we spend a lot of money on the federal government. They're not accountable. They don't tend to work. They're very broken. There's no transparency. There's no competition. There's no debate. You're either for it or against it. And you're a bad person if you're against it. There's these vocational schools around the country. Texas vocational schools were really underperforming 7 years ago. And what we did is we ended up actually changing them so that the schools were only going to be funded based on the salaries of the students coming out. If you tie it to graduation rates, it doesn't work because they can graduate everyone. But we tied it to the salaries coming out. We got the salaries coming out to go up 117% just by putting in that accountability. But most of the country doesn't do that. Most of the country, there's vocational schools, people go, very low graduation rates, they fail. We're not going to go into the K-12 issues you guys know about, but one fact most people don't know is the education inequality in this country is far greater than the wealth inequality, far greater. So there's, and you guys probably see there's an infant formula production thing, which is a crisis right now. There's really basic policy mistakes around that. The way we run our prisons, our probation and parole, There's all sorts of ways to run them much better. We're not doing it though. I'll give you one other example because Elon was speaking today. Austin Infrastructure. I'm very excited about his boring company. And in Austin, we passed a $6 billion, $7 billion plan to build a really small amount of infrastructure. It's already ballooning, cost of $12 billion. For less than half the original money, for $3 billion, you could do over 100 times as many tunnels in terms of what they're building right now. And you could do with 100 more stations. And so basically for a tiny fraction of the cost, and again, I go and talk to the city and talk to the guys, there's no intellectual humility. They don't respect your dignity. Elon's a bad guy, we don't like Elon, whatever, because they're some kind of extreme version. And they're not interested in the truth. And they're really not. They're just interested in like what they're gonna do their way. And so kind of come back to this, like what's going on in our society? Where is this coming from? And say what causes decadence, decay, and decline? I think the more important question is what actually works. Like why is our society functional? And I think you have to take it back to the Enlightenment, right? I mean, if you look at the exponential growth that's happened, that's created the wealth that all of us enjoy, it really happened over the last few centuries, kind of post-Enlightenment. And you had a society that really cared about pursuit of the truth, really cared about competition of ideas, right? I mean, and you need the virtues for this to work, right? The classical virtues that we talk about in our civilization: justice, wisdom, temperance, courage. You need the courage to actually fight for the truth. And so, a long time ago, you tended to have religious dogma, which could be some form of virtue signaling, some form of basically keeping out outsiders. And then you had separately debate and substance. And debate and substance generally lost to religious dogma. And what was unique about the Enlightenment, what was unique about our university system, which we created, was the liberal universities were a place to have debates where substance could actually win against dogma and against people who disagree. You actually had to disagree civilly, and you actually had to pursue truth. You had to have the intellectual humility to know that you don't have all the answers. You had to respect the dignity of people who are debating, and you had to fight for a passion for the truth. And what's happened instead is that most of our universities have been conquered by dogma and by religion. They no longer have these things. So once again, we have the idea of heretics and blasphemy. We don't use those words, but that's what we're facing right now. If you disagree with people, you're a heretic and you're committing blasphemy. If you speak against all sorts of these things you're not supposed to speak against. If you say that DEI is actually causing problems, if you say that here's why ESG is wrong, it's blasphemous. This isn't stuff you're not allowed to attack these days. You're in trouble. You're told not to speak against it again or else you're fired. This has been written about in lots of corporations right now. This happens to all sorts of people. And this is happening first and foremost on our campus. What's happened is this zero-sum, historically illiterate, intolerant, virtue-signaling religion has completely taken over and is silencing people. And our founders were quite fond of heretics. And I don't know if people realize that, but that was kind of the equivalent debate 300 years ago to this woke religion. Is that Benjamin Franklin, he said, "I think all heretics I have known have been virtuous men. They have the virtue of courage, or they wouldn't venture their heresy. And they cannot afford to be deficient in other virtues due to the numerous enemies they provoke." And so, I think thinking what's going on here, all of us, first of all, need to go back and think about, like, where do we not have enough humility to try to learn more? Where are we not respecting people who disagree and actually engaging them and debating them as opposed to calling them names and writing them off? And frankly, I think we should also remember it's actually really good to be offended. It's the opposite of safe spaces. There's this weird cultural thing with the millennial generation. I guess I'm barely part of it, unfortunately, where you're basically supposed to protect people from being offended. You're supposed to protect them from blasphemy. I think it has to be the opposite if our civilization is not going to decline. I think we actually have to go out of our way to learn that when we're offended, we have to be stronger. It doesn't mean you're somehow like elevated as a victim if you're offended. That's your problem if you're offended, and you just stop and think about it. And we need to use that to advance our civilization again.